All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining for this is what now our fourth session in this series that we're doing here at Philo. Really primarily focused on sales kickoffs and leading up through as we enter into sales kickoff season. I am so incredibly excited to have a friend, a marketer, and really a mentor to come in and join us for this part of the conversation. We've got Kyle Lacy joining. He's the former head of global content at ExactTarget and Salesforce, VP of Marketing and OpenView, CMO at an amazing company, which is a sister company of ours here in Indianapolis called Lessonly, that was just acquired by another amazing company who happens to be a customer of ours in Seismic, where he now serves as the SVP of Marketing. Kyle is one of the most creative, driven, revenue-focused marketers that I think I've ever had the pleasure of working with, which I think is just a perfect fit to come in. We've tackled really this idea of sales kickoffs and internal events from a sales enablement perspective. So to be able to get marketing's perspective on this, I think will be incredibly powerful. Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Hopefully I can live up to that intro. I think the same of you. I think we mentor each other, so that's always a positive thing. I'm more than happy to be here.
Mentor, commiserate, whatever works.
Yeah.
Depending on whatever the day is.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about internal events through the lens of sales kickoffs. I have talked to a number of executives who there's always a large focus on external events. Now, these can be either in person or they can be virtual, and obviously a good reason for the focus on those, as those are engaging directly with customers and driving direct revenue. I have heard some of those executives turn and actually refer to some of internal events as have-tos, as in external events, customers want tos, people want to attend. Internal, they have to. We don't really have to think about exactly having everything polished. We don't really have to think necessarily as strategically about them. People have to show up. It's part of their job. We just need to tell them something and they can move on. We are very much not in that guise, so I'm stoked by this. First one, a softball question I would love to lob over to you. When you think of not external, you've been a part of some really epic external events, from ExactTarget's connections to Salesforce, Dreamforce, to standing up and running your own incredibly successful one as a part of Lessonly with Yellowship. When it comes to internal, what has been the best thing you've seen in terms of an internal event, whether it be a kickoff, whether it be just an all company meeting, it could be a meeting itself, a theme, a speaker. What's the best thing you've seen?
It really depends on the company, right? And it depends on the resources you have. Somebody like Salesforce could bring in like a Will I Am into sales kickoff with like just the snap of the finger, right? Benioff's probably hanging out with him right now, probably. If you're a startup, from what the most inspiring kickoffs that we had at Lessonly were where individual contributors and managers got up and spotlighted what they did during the quarter. And also, if you have great board members, have them come and speak at some of these things. Like, it really depends on the size, right? If you have the resources to bring in external speakers, you should, and it should be people that can inspire. And I, to your point that, hey, it's internal, we don't have to deal with it, is absolute crap, because if not your most important or second most important persona is your employee base. And if they're not inspired, how do you really think your customer base is going to be inspired? I don't care how good your product is, right? So, the goal of internal meetings, the goal of external meetings is to create exceptional experiences for all parties involved. And a lot of times, and I don't know why, a lot of times exec teams just do not focus on internal. And it just blows my mind.
It ends up just being a lot of presentations. We ran one session on peer-led content. You mentioned that as one of the first best thing that you had said in that list, was just having peers, whether it be individual contributors, first line managers, standing up and talking through a problem, something they accomplished, a challenge that's going on within the business. Those things can go just an incredible way. So you mentioned thinking through the goal. I would love to then say, if as you think of a sales kickoff specifically within an organization, how do we take an entire global sales team across multiple country, hundreds of people, and align them moving forward? What role should marketing leadership play in that? Are they a support role? Are they from a branding messaging perspective, or should they be really owning the entire event and driving it from beginning to end?
I think it's a shared ownership between the CMO and CRO and their teams, their leadership teams. I don't think marketing should own it, but I think marketing should be involved. We've
As you
seen plenty of sales decks that were built by salespeople, right? Like market. No offense, sales team. You all know, and you shouldn't be like that's not your job, right? So combining the two teams and including as many people as possible in that endeavor is important, just for organizational alignment as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you think of that collaboration, what is the part? What piece should what should be the torch that marketing is carrying during that collaboration, right? You say, look, salespeople driving sales content. Yeah.
I think it's content, and I think it's the creative, right? There shouldn't really be a difference between your creative of your user conference and the creative of your internal SCO, because your internal SCO is also, or global kickoff or whatever, revenue kickoff is maybe even more expensive from a headcount perspective than your user conference, if you think about it. Now, I don't need anybody to like tactically debate me on that, but you get the point on, they're both expensive. It should look as cool and as meaningful as your user conference.
Have you seen examples where people do mesh those two? They take a theme that either was originally driven by a user conference and then use that to drive energy into an internal meeting and an internal rally, or flipped the other way around. Maybe that's even a secondary question of, do you think about kind of the ordering of those?
Yeah, so I'm experiencing it now at Seismic. Our SKO is a couple months, a month and a half before our conference. And we're using it to help vet and go and kind of test messaging that we're going to use at the conference. And so that also gives you a time frame to say, hey, exec teams that are usually not great at getting decks done, which that applies across all companies, by the way. Hey, we've got a SCO that we want to kind of test some of this messaging, and then we've got our user conference. And then the theming of the SCO ties into the user conference. So that because you're testing the same type of messaging, because again, your employee base is almost as important as your buyer and customer base.
I'm saying that the side benefit then is the entire team is so much more prepared going into that user conference. One of our soapboxes is many virtual event. Like, you think about what happens in an in-person event. Main stages are great, right? And they get a lot of the headlines and the venue and all of that. Where the real rubber meets the road are the meetings that are happening during that. Those could be side meetings that happen in a hallway. Those could be pre-planned in an executive briefing center that hangs off of it. But where you're really talking about, how do we take what we're just doing in this message and this vision and the product and our services and help customers solve problems? We believe the exact same thing should happen virtually. I would love to ask you on this one is, how do you think about it differently? You've been in a place specifically with Yellowship. You ran Yellowship as it's external event, customer facing. You ran it a couple years in person, phenomenal event. And then ran it a couple years virtual because of everything happening over the last few years. Do you think about them differently, whether they're in person or virtual, other than just the tactics of how do we communicate messages and set up environments?
I don't think about them differently. Katie Burnett, who runs our global events team, might, but a great example is Yellowship this year was going to be in person outside of 2 weeks before, and we shifted completely virtual within 2 weeks. And it was seamless. And that means that we were thinking about both. And I think moving forward, you have to think hybrid always, right? Like our Shift conference for Seismic coming up end of March is going to be in person. But we also have to take into account that there's going to be people that can't travel. And we also have countries, right? We have Germany, France, UK, APAC. Australia, that we have to support with content. And that's why it's not I don't think of it as a difference between in-person and virtual. I think as it as hybrid.
Yeah.
And I don't know why you wouldn't think that way moving forward. Some people can't come, some people won't travel. I mean, think about connections. The last connections that you and I were at was probably 20,000 people in Indianapolis. Imagine how many more people would have been there if we would have, actually, I don't even know if we simulcasted. I doubt that we had, I
I
doubt
doubt
that
at the
we,
time that
yeah, I
wasn't
can't
really
remember.
done.
No. So imagine how many more people would have tuned in. And it just would have been that much better. And
Yeah.
that, you know, technology's gotten better. And of course, platforms like yours, and it's just easier to do. So you should be in a hybrid mindset, not a either or.
So I'd like to make a step away from large events, because large events are easy to get people excited by, and they're typically at least led and directed at the top level, maybe not at the execution level, by an executive team who is very seasoned on how do we take a message and distill it down and then inspire a large group of people in order to act. Following that, if you take an internal kickoff, that then flows down to smaller meetings with people who that isn't necessarily their job. Those can be mid-level sales leaders, regional vice presidents, sales managers who are getting their teams together on a quarterly basis to recap the quarter, doing their own QBRs, pulling together 20, 25 people that are sales people, SDRs, solutions consultants together. What is your view? How do you take a message and a theme and the inspiration you get in a large event and then bring that down and make it easy for sales teams in general to do similarly inspire and align their teams at a smaller scale?
Well, you got to give them direction on how to do it, number one, and you got to give them the content in order to do it as well. I mean, you know, if you're spending tons of time designing a new keynote deck for a conference, you probably should think about how it applies to your narrative deck, right? And how you can enable a sales team and leaders to be inspired and excited about how they're speaking to their teams and how they're building out their QBRs or whatever the meaning is. It's, you know, and sometimes people won't latch onto it, which is fine. But I think a lot of it has to do with enablement. And I'm not just saying that working for an enablement company, honestly. I think it's just like what's inspirational about what you're talking about at SCO, at your conferences, and how does that distill down into messaging with mission, vision, values at a core team level? And if you can supply at least the direction and the deliverables in order to kind of frame that, then it's up to the managers to take it any direction they want. And some will be inspirational, some won't, and that's fine, as long as the message is similar.
Yeah, I think back to, again, the events that we've been a part of. It was always amazing that whether it be, if I remember right, we called ours our sales and services kickoff. It was kind of joint events, maybe the global sales and services kickoff, GSSK, or connections, which is the external version out to customers. It felt like the slides used during those and the entire message, those within a week and for the entire next year, those served as the foundation of every sales deck, every sales pitch that were happening on the ground, either virtually or on site with prospects and customers talking about what we do.
But it was foundational, right? Like it came from top down, bottom up, which is why I get so pissed off when somebody says it's just an internal event. And you and I both know Scott Dorsey, who's the CEO of ExactTarget, did not think that way. Tim Kopp did not think that way. And they delivered it from the internal team believed in it, and then it was delivered to the customer base. And it was all cultural, right? It was very much foundational to the company.
And that's the thing, thinking back on it, it all just, at the time, it felt like it just naturally happened when you're in it, but that was because it was built over years. There's a bunch of companies who don't have that naturally ingrained in them. So how do you start to build that muscle? And you may trip over yourself a time or two, but each time it's going to get a little bit easier and a little bit better. So I really like this path we've gone on. I'll end with one piece, because we've kind of started super high level, and each time we've kind of chunked it down into a smaller, more tactical piece. And then with the latest of individual teams and team meetings, those parts in that last question approached it from the marketing and messaging perspective. How do we carry the vision and message consistently across those meetings. You've been a huge advocate on marketing's role or imperative for marketing to take as much of a revenue ownership as the revenue teams. Really, even to say, stop talking about it as sales and marketing, talk about it as revenue alignment in general.
Yeah.
I think of those individual QBRs, looping this back around to the last question. Part of it is the message. The other part is tactically, okay, as a team, what's our number for this quarter? Did we hit our number last quarter? What's our pipeline look like? How are we going to close that pipeline? Where are things getting held in the, getting hung up in the sales process? Any number of other topics you have to dive into. I'd love your just general perspective. We've got a lot of our audience here, sales enablement, sales leaders. What role should marketing be playing in really understanding the mechanics of what those teams are dealing with from a sales perspective?
They should be tied at the hip. You know, we're talking about tactical meetings. One of the most important meetings that we had at Lessonly and that we have at Seismic is a funnel and pipeline meeting, which is all basically revenue owners, like who own pipeline creation, bookings, targets, get in a room and talk about where are we at and where do we need to go. And they're doing that bi-weekly. If not, like Lessonly, it was weekly. Like there is nothing, if you want to focus on use SCO as an alignment, use your global kickoff or whatever as an alignment mechanism, right? Like if sales is siloed and marketing is siloed and services is siloed and everybody's doing their own thing, they're just all going to one pipeline number, you're going to lose in the long run because it's going to be really, really hard to get anything done. And I think that kickoffs and revenue numbers, pipeline creation, funnel metrics, they all serve one purpose, which is to align the frontline teams that are trying to attack the market.
Yeah, I love that. There's one question we've gotten from people who are out watching this live right now, and I pose it to you. And this is somebody who comes from the sales perspective. If they feel like they're in these events, either planning a large event or small meetings, and they don't currently have the type of collaboration with marketing you just said, what steps can the sales side take in order to start that relationship, right? In order to start to bring them in? What can they do to best support their marketing teams getting more involved?
Two is it has to come from the top down. And if you are not at the exec level making these decisions, you need to manage up to give examples of why it's important and to try to get ownership there. Outside of that, it's just ask for advice. You know, marketing is not going to stop to give marketing will stop whatever they're doing to give feedback on an event. Like, especially, you know, unless it's like a bunch of growth, you know, demand gen marketers, which even then I'm pretty sure they're going to give feedback on that. And usually the issue is that they haven't been asked. And I think it goes both ways, right? Like you're so busy. We're all so busy trying to focus on our day-to-day that we don't think about all the other teams that are also doing that. And just asking, sharing an idea before it's ready, getting feedback, you're gonna get ownership for sure. And that's where you start. And then you have to figure out how to build that off of that, depending on the business and the team and all that stuff.
It's amazing how many times, like, there's nothing complicated about this. It's just a matter of like, get on, grab a coffee, get on a Zoom with somebody, look them face to face, and ask their opinion.
It's amazing how bad we are at it.
It's amazing how bad we are at it, me included. Luckily, every time I've come to you and say, hey, Kyle, I could really use your perspective and help on something, you've always been incredibly generous with your time and thoughts. And you are here. Ways, man. You have been here as well. So thank you so much. Congratulations on the acquisition and everything you guys are doing at Seismic. We are so excited for you and are big fans and advocates. So really appreciate it, man.
Goes both ways. Thank you. Thanks for
having me. Have a good one.